Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 24. Synthesis: the Patriarchal Narratives as the Torah's Covenantal Foundation. The Patriarchal Narratives, Genesis 12:36, form a pivotal section of the Book of Genesis, chronicling the lives of Abraham, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, whose covenantal relationship with God establishes the theological and historical foundation for Israel's identity as a chosen people. These chapters shift from the universal concerns of the primeval history, Genesis 1:11, creation, sin, and humanity's dispersion, to the particular story of a family through which God promises land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing, for all nations, Genesis 12:1-3. Organized by the Toledo generations formula, the narratives weave episodic stories of faith, conflict, divine intervention, and human frailty into a cohesive arc that prepares for Israel's emergence in the Torah's later books, Exodus, Deuteronomy. As the Torah's covenantal foundation, Genesis 12:36 introduces the divine-human partnership that defines Israel's relationship with God, setting the stage for the Exodus liberation, Sinai covenant, and Israel's mission as a kingdom of priests, Exodus 19:6. Rooted in the Middle Bronze Age, c. 2000–1500 BCE, setting and finalized during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, the narratives address timeless themes: covenant, faith, providence, human growth, land, and universal blessing, that unify Genesis and anchor the Torah's redemptive narrative. This synthesis examines the narrative's role as the covenantal foundation through their theological framework, narrative structure, historical and cultural contexts, Jewish interpretive traditions, interfaith significance, and contemporary relevance, demonstrating how they bridge ancient promises and the Torah's vision of redemption. 1. Theological framework: covenant as the core. The patriarchal narratives establish the covenant as the theological core of the Torah, initiating a divine-human partnership that shapes Israel's identity and mission. The covenant, articulated in Genesis 12:1-3, 15, and 17, encompasses three promises: land, descendants, and blessing, that recur across the narratives and extend into the Torah's broader arc. Covenant promises. Land, Canaan. God's promise to Abraham, "To your offspring I will give this land," Genesis 12:7, reiterated to Isaac, Genesis 26:3, and Jacob, Genesis 28:13, establishes Canaan as the covenantal homeland. Abraham's purchase of Machpelah, Genesis 23, and Jacob's return to Canaan, Genesis 33, symbolize this claim, prefiguring Israel's conquest in Joshua. Descendants, great nation. The promise of numerous descendants, Genesis 15:5, as numerous as the stars, is fulfilled through Isaac's birth, Genesis 21:17, Jacob's 12 sons, Genesis 29:30, and the growth of Israel in Exodus, Exodus 1:7. Despite obstacles like barrenness, Genesis 16:25–21, divine intervention ensures continuity. Blessing, for all nations. The universal blessing, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed," Genesis 12:3, positions Israel as a conduit for global redemption, fulfilled through the Torah's ethical vision, Deuteronomy 4:6-8, and prophetic promises, Isaiah 49:6. Covenantal rituals. The covenant between the pieces, Genesis 15:7-21, with its ritual of divided animals, underscores divine commitment, with God's unilateral passage through the pieces symbolizing unmerited grace. This foreshadows the Sinai covenant's sacrificial rituals, Exodus 24:5-8. Circumcision, Brit Milah, Genesis 17:10-14, marks the covenant physically and spiritually, distinguishing Israel from other nations and preparing for the Torah's holiness laws, Leviticus 19. Its universal applicability, Genesis 17:12-13, reflects the covenant's inclusivity. Abraham's altars, Genesis 12:7-8, 13:18, and Jacob's pillar at Bethel, Genesis 28:18-22, establish sacred spaces, prefiguring the tabernacle, Exodus 25:40, and temple, 1 Kings 8. Theological significance. The covenant introduces a monotheistic relationship, with YHWH as the sole divine partner, contrasting with ancient Near Eastern polytheism. This relationship, based on faith, Genesis 15:6, and obedience, shapes the Torah's covenantal theology, Deuteronomy 7:9. The narratives emphasize divine faithfulness despite human frailty, Abraham's doubts, Genesis 15:2-3, Isaac's passivity, Genesis 26, Jacob's deception, Genesis 27, foreshadowing Israel's struggles and God's grace in Exodus Deuteronomy. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, expands the covenant's scope, preparing for the Torah's vision of Israel as a light to the nations, Isaiah 42:6, fulfilled through ethical laws and prophetic ideals. Connection to the Torah. The covenant links Genesis to Exodus, with Abraham's descendants becoming a nation in Egypt, Exodus 1:7, liberated to inherit Canaan, Exodus 3:8. The Sinai Covenant, Exodus 19:24, builds on Genesis 12:36, formalizing Israel's responsibilities. Leviticus and Numbers extend the covenant's holiness and land themes, with laws reflecting Abraham's chaste, Leviticus 19:18, and rituals echoing his altars, Leviticus 1:7. Deuteronomy reiterates the covenant's promises, Deuteronomy 31:5, tying Israel's destiny to Genesis 12:36. Cultural impact. The covenant shapes Jewish identity, with Brit Milah and Torah study reinforcing Abraham's legacy. It influences Christian theology, Romans 4, and Islamic views of Ibrahim's covenant, Surah al-Baqarah 2:1-4, fostering interfaith dialogue. Globally, the covenant inspires narratives of commitment, from religious rituals to secular contracts, seen in literature and ethical frameworks. 2. Narrative structure, a unified covenantal arc. The patriarchal narrative structure, organized by Toledo and episodic storytelling, creates a unified arc that establishes the covenantal foundation, bridging Genesis and the Torah's redemptive narrative. Toledo framework. The Toledo formula, these are the generations of Genesis 11:27, 25 hours 12 minutes, 25 hours 19 minutes, 36:1, organizes the narratives into genealogical and narrative sections, tracing the covenantal line from Abraham to Jacob's sons, the progenitors of Israel's tribes. This structure ensures continuity, linking Genesis to Exodus, Exodus 1:1-6. Non-covenantal lines, Ishmael, Genesis 25:12-18, Esau, Genesis 36, are included, reflecting the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, while prioritizing the chosen line, foreshadowing Israel's distinct role, Deuteronomy 7:6-8. Episodic storytelling. The narrative's episodes, Abraham's call, Genesis 12:1-9, the Akedah, Genesis 22, Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, are self-contained yet interconnected, reinforcing covenantal themes. Repetitive motifs, like wife-sister stories, Genesis 12:10-20, 21:18, 26:6-11, and barrenness overcome, Genesis 16:21, 25 hours 21 minutes, emphasize divine providence and human faith. Key episodes, such as the covenant ceremonies, Genesis 15:17, and Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, mark theological turning points, establishing the patriarchs as covenantal exemplars. These stories prepare for the Torah's narrative climaxes, like the Exodus, Exodus 14, and Sinai, Exodus 19:24. Thematic unity. Faith and obedience, Abraham's trust, Genesis 15:6, and Jacob's transformation, Genesis 32:33, model emunah, prefiguring Israel's covenantal obligations, Deuteronomy 6:4-5. Divine providence, God's interventions, Isaac's birth, Genesis 21:17, Hagar's rescue, Genesis 21:17-21, Jacob's protection, Genesis 31 hours 24 minutes, demonstrate faithfulness, preparing for the Exodus liberation, Exodus 3:7-10. Human frailty, the patriarch's flaws, Abraham's deception, Genesis 12:13, Jacob's rivalry, Genesis 27, highlight Teshuvah, mirroring Israel's cycles of sin and repentance in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Land and identity, the sojourner motif, Genesis 12:10, 23:4, and land promises, Genesis 15:18-21, underscore Israel's destiny, fulfilled in Joshua and echoed in Deuteronomy's land laws, Deuteronomy 26. Connection to the Torah. The narrative's arc, from Abraham's call to Jacob's 12 sons, sets the stage for Exodus, with Joseph's story, Genesis 37:50, transitioning to Israel's enslavement, Exodus 1. The covenant's promises are formalized at Sinai, Exodus 19:24, with the Torah's laws reflecting Genesis 12:36's ethical vision. The Toledo structure prefigures the genealogies in Numbers, Numbers 1:4, linking the patriarchs to Israel's tribal organization. The narrative's emphasis on divine-human partnership informs the Torah's covenantal renewal, Deuteronomy 29:30. Cultural impact. The narrative's structure shapes Jewish liturgy, with Parshiyo like Lech Lecha and Vayera unifying synagogue readings. It influences Christian and Islamic storytelling, with the episodic format resonating in sermons and Quranic narratives. Globally, the narrative's archetypal arc inspires literature and film, from family sagas to redemption stories, reflecting their universal appeal. 3. Historical and cultural contexts, anchoring the covenant. The patriarchal narrative's historical and cultural contexts, Middle Bronze Age setting, Babylonian exile composition, and ancient Near Eastern engagement, anchor the covenantal foundation, ensuring its relevance for ancient and modern audiences. Middle Bronze Age setting, c. 2000–1500 BCE. The narrative's depiction of semi-nomadic life, Abraham's migrations, Genesis 12:1-9, Isaac's sojourn in Gerar, Genesis 26:1-6, Jacob's journey to Haran, Genesis 28:10-29-1, reflects Middle Bronze Age pastoralism, as seen in Mari texts and execration texts. This setting grounds the covenant in a tangible milieu, with Canaan's cities, Shechem, Hebron, evidenced by archaeology. Social practices, like Hagar's surrogacy, Genesis 16, and Abraham's land purchase, Genesis 23, parallel Nuzi contracts and Hittite protocols, lending historical plausibility. The covenant's land promise, Genesis 12:7, engages Canaanite territorial claims, asserting divine ownership, Leviticus 25:23. The setting's pastoral imagery, tents, flocks, wells, symbolizes divine dependence, prefiguring Israel's wilderness journey, Exodus 15:17, and Torah's agricultural laws, Deuteronomy 22:26. Babylonian exile composition, 587–539 BCE. Likely finalized during the exile, the narratives address Judah's displacement, with the patriarchs sojourning, Genesis 12:10, 23:4, mirroring exilic hopes for return, as in Ezekiel 37. The covenant's promises, Genesis 12:1-3, counter Babylonian imperial ideologies, affirming God's sovereignty. The emphasis on divine faithfulness, seen in Isaac's birth, Genesis 21:17, and Jacob's protection, Genesis 31:24, offers hope, preparing for the Torah's restoration themes, Deuteronomy 31:5. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, positions Israel as a witness to God's global purpose, Isaiah 45:22-23. The exilic context shapes the narrative's adaptability, with their themes resonating in later Jewish diaspora settings, from Hellenistic to modern times. Ancient Near Eastern engagement. The narratives engage Mesopotamian, Mari treaties, Canaanite, Ugaritic rituals, Egyptian, diplomatic tales, and Hittite, land transactions, traditions, making them accessible to ancient audiences. The Covenant, Genesis 15:17, adapts suzerain vassal treaties, emphasizing divine initiative, unlike bilateral pacts. Religious motifs, like altars, Genesis 12:7, and Melchizedek's blessing, Genesis 14:18-20, repurpose Canaanite practices for monotheism, prefiguring the Torah's cultic laws, Leviticus 1:7. The universal blessing counters regional deities' localized power, aligning with the Torah's ethical monotheism, Deuteronomy 6:4-5. Connection to the Torah. The Middle Bronze Age setting provides a historical backdrop for the Exodus narrative, with Abraham's Egyptian sojourn, Genesis 12:10-20, foreshadowing Israel's enslavement, Exodus 1. The exilic composition links Genesis to Deuteronomy's restoration promises, unifying the Torah's arc. Ancient Near Eastern parallels ground the covenant in a familiar framework, preparing for the Torah's distinct laws and identity, Exodus 19:5-6, which transform regional norms into a universal ethic. Cultural impact. The historical contexts inform Jewish liturgy, avo prayer, Zionist attachment to Israel, and interfaith theology, with Christianity and Islam citing Genesis 12:36's covenantal roots. Globally, the narrative's historical grounding inspires archaeological tourism and literature, from biblical novels to documentaries, bridging ancient and modern worlds. 4 Jewish interpretive traditions, enriching the covenant. Jewish interpretive traditions, rabbinic exegesis, midrash, Talmud, Rashi, Ramban, and mystical insights, Zohar, Kabbalah, enrich the patriarchal narrative's covenantal foundation, revealing their theological and ethical depths. Rabbinic exegesis. Midrashic insights. Bereshit Rabbah, c. 5th century CE, views Abraham's call, Genesis 12:1, as rejecting idolatry, establishing monotheism as the covenant's basis. The Akedah, Genesis 22, is Abraham's ultimate trial, meriting Israel's redemption, linking Genesis to the Torah's sacrificial system, Leviticus 1:7. Talmudic perspectives. The Talmud, Nedarim 32a, praises Abraham's faith, Genesis 15:6, as surpassing Noah's, with Brit Milah, Genesis 17, symbolizing spiritual purity, prefiguring Torah laws, Leviticus 12:3. Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, models Israel's resilience, informing Deuteronomy's covenantal renewal, Deuteronomy 30. Medieval commentaries, Rashi, 1040-1105 CE, clarifies the covenant's promises, linking Genesis 12:3 to Israel's mission, while Ramban, 1194-1270 CE, sees Abraham's altars as claiming Canaan, prefiguring Joshua's conquest. Their exegesis unifies Genesis with the Torah's legal and narrative arc. Ethical lessons. The patriarch's flaws, Abraham's deception, Genesis 12:13, Jacob's rivalry, Genesis 27, invite Teshuvah, mirroring Israel's growth in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Women's agency, Rebekah, Genesis 27, Rachel, Genesis 31, highlights covenantal partnership, informing Torah ethics, Leviticus 19:18. Mystical interpretations. Zoharic allegory. The Zohar, c. 13th century CE, views the patriarchs as Sphirot, Abraham, chaste, Isaac, Gevurah, Jacob, Tiferet, unifying divine attributes. The covenant, Genesis 15:17, aligns the Shekinah with humanity, preparing for the Torah's holiness, Exodus 19:6. Cosmic role, Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, symbolizes the Sphirot's connection with the covenant restoring creation, a theme echoed in Deuteronomy's renewal, Deuteronomy 30:19-20. The Akedah balances divine attributes, prefiguring the temple's atonement, Leviticus 16. Spiritual ethics. The Zohar emphasizes chaste and tikkun, repair, with Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18:18, modeling Torah ethics, Deuteronomy 10:19, ensuring the covenant's spiritual vitality. Connection to the Torah. Rabbinic exegesis links Genesis 12:36 to Sinai, with the covenant's promises fulfilled in Israel's nationhood, Exodus 19:24, and laws reflecting patriarchal virtues, Leviticus 19. Mystical readings align the covenant with the Torah's cosmic purpose, unifying divine and human realms. The interpretive traditions ensure the narrative's relevance, with Midrash and Kabbalah informing Torah study and liturgy, preparing for the Torah's ethical and spiritual demands. Cultural impact. Jewish interpretations shape synagogue readings, Parshiot, rituals, Brit Milah, and ethics, Tzedakah, unifying communities. They influence interfaith theology, with Christian and Islamic scholars engaging midrashic insights. Globally, the interpretive richness inspires storytelling, from midrashic novels to interfaith dialogues, ensuring the covenant's enduring legacy. 5. Interfaith significance, a shared covenantal heritage. The patriarchal narrative's covenantal foundation resonates in Christian and Islamic theology, fostering a shared Abrahamic heritage that unifies the Torah with broader religious traditions. Christianity. Salvation history. Paul interprets Abraham's faith, Genesis 15:6, as justification by faith, Romans 4:16. Linking the covenant to Christ's redemption. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, is fulfilled in Jesus, the seed, Galatians 3:16, connecting Genesis to the New Testament. Key episodes. The Akedah, Genesis 22, prefigures Christ's sacrifice, Hebrews 11:17-19. With Isaac's submission mirroring Jesus' obedience. Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, symbolizes divine human connection, influencing Christian mysticism, John 1:51. Torah connection. The covenant prepares for the Torah's law, which Christianity views as fulfilled in Christ, Matthew 5:17. The narrative's emphasis on grace and faith aligns with the Torah's covenantal arc, bridging Genesis and the Gospels. Islam. Prophetic legacy. The Quran honors Ibrahim as a Hanif, monotheist, with the covenant, Genesis 12:1-17, reflected in Surah Al-Baqarah 2:124-129, where Ibrahim and Ismail build the Kaaba. The universal blessing aligns with Islam's global mission, Surah Ibrahim 14:35-41. Key episodes. The Akedah, Genesis 22, appears in Surah As-Safat 37:99-113, with Ismail as the son, celebrated in Eid al-Adha. Hagar's story, Genesis 21:14-19, is central to Hajj, linking Genesis to Islamic ritual. Torah connection. The covenant prepares for the Torah's monotheism, which Islam sees as continued in the Quran. The narrative's ethical focus, chaste, justice, resonates with Islamic values, Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:8, unifying Abrahamic traditions. Interfaith dialogue. The shared covenant fosters dialogue, with Genesis 12:3 inspiring initiatives like the Abrahamic Family House, 2023, uniting Jewish, Christian, and Muslim worshippers. The Akedah's varying interpretations encourage mutual respect, as seen in the Scriptural Reasoning Project. Hagar's inclusion supports Jewish-Muslim dialogue, with interfaith forums citing Genesis 21 to bridge traditions, reinforcing the Torah's universal ethic, Deuteronomy 10:19. Connection to the Torah. The narrative's interfaith significance links Genesis to the Torah's vision of Israel as a light to the nations, Isaiah 42:6, with the covenant's universal scope preparing for the Torah's ethical laws, Leviticus 19:34. The shared heritage unifies Abrahamic faiths, with the Torah's covenantal framework informing Christian and Islamic theology, fostering cooperation. Cultural impact. The interfaith legacy shapes religious education, with seminaries teaching Genesis 12:36 alongside New Testament and Quranic texts. It inspires interfaith art, literature, and initiatives, from medieval manuscripts to modern peace summits. Globally, the Covenant's universal vision promotes ethical dialogue, addressing issues like peace and justice, as seen in UN interfaith forums. 6. Contemporary relevance, the Covenant in modern contexts. The patriarchal narrative's covenantal foundation remains relevant, addressing modern challenges, spiritual disconnection, social inequities, environmental crises, and cultural fragmentation, through their timeless themes. Spiritual renewal. Abraham's faith, Genesis 15:6, and Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, inspires spiritual resilience, with Jewish renewal, Christian retreats, and Sufi mysticism citing Genesis 12:36 to counter secularism. Digital platforms like Spheria and YouVersion make the narratives accessible, fostering global devotion. The Akedah, Genesis 22, informs interfaith liturgy, with Rosh Hashanah, Lent, and Eid al-Adha drawing on its themes of sacrifice and trust, addressing modern spiritual seeking. Pew Research, 2023. Social justice and ethics. Hagar's rescue, Genesis 21:17-21, and Abraham's justice, Genesis 18:22-33, fuel advocacy for migrants, women, and minorities, with groups like HIS and Islamic Relief citing Genesis 12:36. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, aligns with global equity goals, UN SDGs, 2015. Jacob's Teshuvah, Genesis 32:33, informs ethical leadership, with interfaith programs like the Elijah Institute using Genesis 12:36 to train leaders in conflict resolution and inclusivity. Environmental stewardship. The Land Promise, Genesis 12:7, inspires Jewish Baal Tashkit, environmental ethics, Christian creation care, Laudato Si, 2015, and Muslim eco-theology, with Genesis 12:36 informing climate action at COP29, 2024. Abraham's stewardship models sustainable practices, addressing 2024's record heat, NOAA. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, fosters interfaith cooperation, with initiatives like the Abraham Accords, 2020, citing Abraham's legacy for peace. The Abraham Path Initiative retraces his migrations, promoting cultural dialogue in the Middle East. The narrative's inclusivity, Hagar, Melchizedek, supports multiculturalism, with Genesis 12:36 cited in diversity policies, for example, EU Integration Strategy, 2021, addressing global migration, 281 million migrants, 2023. Cultural innovation. Genesis 12:36 inspires modern art, ADNESA literature, Maggie Anton's novels, and media, Netflix's biblical series, adapting covenantal themes for diverse audiences. Virtual reality tours of Hebron, Genesis 23, and Ara-driven exegesis, Spheria, 2024, ensure accessibility. The narrative's universal themes resonate in secular contexts, with Genesis 12:3 informing human rights frameworks and Jacob's reconciliation, Genesis 33, shaping conflict resolution literature. Connection to the Torah. The narrative's contemporary applications extend the Torah's covenantal vision, with their ethics, chaste, justice, informing modern laws and policies, as seen in Deuteronomy's social laws, Deuteronomy 15. Their interfaith and cultural relevance fulfills the Torah's call to be a light to the nations, Isaiah 42:6, bridging ancient promises and modern aspirations. Cultural impact. The narrative's relevance unifies religious and secular communities, shaping ethical discourse and cultural creativity, from interfaith summits to digital Torah study. Globally, their covenantal vision addresses 21st-century challenges, ensuring their legacy endures in policy, art, and activism. 7. Synthesis, unifying Genesis and the Torah. The patriarchal narratives serve as the Torah's covenantal foundation by establishing the divine-human partnership that unifies Genesis and drives the Torah's redemptive arc. Theologically, the covenant, Genesis 12:1-3, 15, 17, introduces God's promises, land, descendants, blessing, that shape Israel's identity and mission, fulfilled in Exodus, Deuteronomy. Narratively, the Toledo structure and episodic storytelling create a cohesive arc, linking Abraham's call to Israel's nationhood, preparing for Sinai's covenant, Exodus 19:24. Historically, the Middle Bronze Age setting and exilic composition ground the covenant in a tangible milieu, addressing ancient and modern audiences with hope and identity. Jewish interpretations, Midrash, Zohar, enrich the covenant's ethical and spiritual depths, connecting Genesis to the Torah's laws and vision. Interfaith significance unifies Abrahamic faiths, with the covenant resonating in Christian and Islamic theology, fulfilling the Torah's universal ethic. Contemporary applications, spiritual renewal, social justice, environmental ethics, dialogue, and cultural innovation, extend the covenant's relevance, addressing global challenges with timeless wisdom. As the Torah's foundation, Genesis 12:36 bridges ancient promises and redemptive fulfillment, inviting all to engage its vision of faith, justice, and universal blessing. Theological unity. The covenant unifies the Torah's themes, monotheism, grace, ethical responsibility, linking Genesis promises to Deuteronomy's renewal, Deuteronomy 30. The narrative's faith and providence prepare for the Torah's covenantal obligations, Exodus 19:5-6. Narrative continuity. The Toledo arc connects Genesis to Exodus, with the patriarch's family becoming Israel's tribes, Exodus 1:1-6. The narrative's episodic structure foreshadows the Torah's redemptive climaxes, from liberation, Exodus 14, to conquest, Joshua. Historical and cultural bridge. The narrative's contexts: Bronze Age, exile, ancient Near Eastern engagement, anchor the covenant, making it relatable yet distinct, preparing for the Torah's unique identity, Deuteronomy 7:6-8. Interpretive and interfaith depth. Jewish exegesis and interfaith theology enrich the covenant, linking Genesis to the Torah's ethical and universal vision, fostering dialogue and cooperation. Contemporary resonance. The narrative's applications ensure their vitality, addressing modern issues with covenantal wisdom, fulfilling the Torah's call to holiness and justice, Leviticus 19:2. 8. Conclusion: the covenant's enduring legacy. The patriarchal narrative's role as the Torah's covenantal foundation underscores their profound significance as a theological, narrative, and cultural cornerstone. By introducing the covenant, land, descendants, blessing, Genesis 12:36 establishes the divine-human partnership that unifies the Torah, linking Abraham's faith to Israel's redemptive journey. The narrative's structure, historical contexts, Jewish interpretations, interfaith resonance, and contemporary applications ensure their enduring relevance, bridging ancient promises and modern aspirations. From synagogue readings to interfaith summits, from ethical advocacy to digital art, Genesis 12:36 invites all to engage its vision of covenantal faith, ethical responsibility, and universal hope. As the Torah's foundation, the patriarchal narratives prepare for the redemptive arc of Exodus-Deuteronomy, offering a timeless guide for navigating divine purpose, human struggle, and global redemption in an ever-changing world. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.